Welcome to Harmonious Workplaces, a podcast about corporate culture, organizational change management, and workplace behavior. Harmonious Workplaces was started by independent consultants Rich Cruz, Ben Kleinman, and Cheryl Volpe to explore, challenge, and build on various organizational culture and change management concepts. It's a blend of theory and practice based on their personal and professional experiences working with companies of all sizes across various industries. If you own a business, lead a team, want new ideas about the corporate environment, or just want to listen to a group of consultants talking about how to make work more enjoyable, we invite you to sit back, relax, and dive in with us to Harmonious Workplaces. Welcome to our 13th podcast, A Baker's Dozen. At some point, just about every business will go through some kind of crisis, whether it's contaminated medicine, an oil spill, a collapsed mine, or less life-threatening issues. You can be sure that some kind of crisis will hit your business. The question is, will you be ready? What's the one thing you can do now to minimize missteps when navigating a crisis? Keep listening to find out. Hello, Harmonious Workplaces listeners. As always, we're glad that you're with us today. I'm Rich Cruz, joined by my colleague Cheryl Volpe.
Hello.
And Ben Kleinman.
Hi.
And here we are at our Baker's Dozen episode 13, lucky number 13.
That's right.
And what better thing to talk about with the number 13 than crisis communication, crisis management. Boy, we've picked a lucky one today, haven't we?
We sure have. We sure have. And at some point, every business goes through some kind of a crisis, and whatever that crisis is for you in your business, I think we can all think of some that are just top of mind when you think of crisis management, crisis communications in the workplace world. And there was that Tylenol contaminated medicine, and there was the BP oil spill, there was the collapsed mine in Chile. Whether it's those types of things that come to mind or less threatening ones, you can be pretty sure that something's going to hit your business. Maybe not quite that grave, but something will come along. And the question is, are you going to be ready for it? So
that's right.
That's sort of what we thought we would talk about. And one thing, there's absolutely one thing that you can do right now when you're not in crisis mode, I hope, that will get you ready so that you can minimize any missteps and be better prepared. So keep listening to find out what that might be.
I'm on the edge of my seat, man. What is it?
You got to listen to find out.
I have to wait. Okay. Well.
All right.
Well,
so there's one, as I was thinking about crises, one that came to mind for me was the BP oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico. And what I was curious for you guys, what's one thing that you remember about that event? What's one thing that stuck in your mind? Because we're kind of a few for me. And so anything top of mind for you?
One thing that came to mind was just the fact that everybody knew about this thing. It became a worldwide phenomenon because it affected so many people. So, but the other thing was some of the innovation that happened around that. Wasn't there somebody who ended up devising something to remove the oil?
Was it the mesh and that system? Something around that? Wow, we've got to do homework in a whole different industry.
There was that, but it was advanced containment and dispersants and things like that. But they were also doing all kinds of incredible technology innovations and ways to drill down through the rock to get to the part where the well had exploded and where the oil was leaking. And it was something about where that valve was that they couldn't get to through normal means. So they had to drill this whole thing, and it was just incredibly complicated.
And I remember from a communication standpoint, I remember there were diagrams and stuff that they were showing about how these things actually worked and that, which was really cool. Yeah. Super
fascinating. Cheryl, was there something top of mind for you for that?
The wildlife, the rescuers, the first responders for the animals. I mean, that is just those images, the birds, that horribly classic image of the oil-covered birds and the
Right.
devastation to the
I
ecosystem.
remember those from another oil spill in Alaska, when you just had these images of this coast with oil washing up the coast and these birds and seals and all sorts of wildlife, where you had people trying to rub the oil off and things like that. It was just horrible, just
Nightmare.
devastating.
And Dawn dish
Dawn-
soap is
Dawn
still
dish
using,
soap.
they're still using the connection to their usefulness and those crises in their current commercial.
Yeah.
That's amazing. Good for them.
I remember that distinctly. I was like, they're really using dishwashing or dish detergent to clean gulls. Who
Right.
knew? Yeah.
So
Yeah.
as taking advantage of a terrible opportunity.
Yeah. Well, and
Yeah.
coming back to it too. I
Sure.
mean, it's still something that everyone, even if you weren't around then or it was not top of mind for you, it's something that would resonate regardless. It's
Right.
kind of one of those timeless things. So
Right.
that's so cool. Good for them.
Leadership example of taking
Yeah. Well,
and communicating it in
right.
a way.
Taking advantage of something in the popular media
Right.
and making a thing of it. Maybe
For
not
sure.
quite as important as Seinfeld taking advantage of the Pop-Tarts and the popularity of Pop-Tarts right now, but you know,
I
similar.
can't wait for Friday, man. I can't wait for that thing to come out. I really want to see what he does with that.
42.1% of people have no idea what I'm talking about.
That's right. But the other what 60 something percent were cheers to you, man.
Can't wait for Friday either. That's right. The rest of us.
One of the things for me with the BP oil spill that stood out was their CEO, Tony Hayward, at the time, coming out on social media. Basically, I think in an interview, he said, "I want my life back." And this was shortly after the explosion had happened, and there were 11 workers that had died in that, and it was spilling something like 800,000 gallons per day into the Gulf of Mexico. And I'm sure he didn't mean for it to come out that way, but that's the way it came out, and that just exploded. That was all over. That was all anyone saw when they thought, let me get an update about the situation in the Gulf, and that just took over the narrative. And so
Right.
here you have this narrative that is no longer about a situation that could be so completely unique and innovative with the stuff we were just talking about in terms of capturing the oil with nets and dispersants and capturing all these new technologies and innovative ways to drill down and seal off this well that's gushing. You had this completely asinine comment out there that was just taking over. And so I think that's where they sort of lost the thread, they lost the plot, and it was really hard for them to recover as a company. I mean, Hayward was gone after that. That was sort of like the end of his utility as a manager, as a leader at BP. But I think that the thing that to me stood out was that was a moment where they really just lost their way with communications, with their management of the communications in that moment, in that crisis. And so I think that's Rich, where maybe we can come back to some of those things that we've talked about from a timelessness perspective and a communications perspective. And Cheryl, I know that's huge for you, is you always bring us back to communication being that first critical thing. So maybe we could dive into some of those things that we've talked about before and that we see as maybe being useful in managing a crisis and communicating throughout a crisis. What's top of mind for you guys?
Well, I mean, using the Hayward example, right? I mean, I think it does point to that these crises, as much as they're a business problem, they are very much a human problem. Certainly that leader, his emotional intelligence was spent, right? But we have people anywhere in the organization that it could be a small crisis, it can be a large one, whatever. But people are going to have some emotional reaction to what's happening, right? And it's normal, it's natural, but we need to be able to manage ourselves, but help others to manage that, or things can wildly spiral out of control.
The tire fire, right? I mean, we were talking about comfort with ambiguity, and what could be more ambiguous than a crisis out of nowhere, right? And even if there are communication models in place, or plans, or evacuation drills, or training, what is at the core of that response, but the traits of the people at the core of the situation in a position to provide answers and solutions. And that is another example of having that comfort with ambiguity.
Yep.
Well, which overlays with some of the things we're going to talk about. Sure. Go ahead.
Yeah. No, I think that's true. And for me, it also comes back to, what are the key values of your organization, and can your leaders quickly pull those in and reference those and use those as anchors, essentially? So regardless of whether you're in a press conference or you have something that's prepared ahead of time, do you know how to reference those and have those feed in? And usually those values and your company's mission are pretty timeless and noble kinds of things. So they help you orient and frame any kind of a message. And something we've talked about, you were just saying, Cheryl, comfort with ambiguity, but also this idea of communicate. We've talked before about communicate what you know and what you don't know. And so that comes through when you anchor to your values, and you can say, well, we don't know, but as an organization, we believe in X. And so we're going to do everything we can to do right by our people according to our value of X or Y or Z or whatever that is. And so it gives you that sort of rock to stay and communicate outwards from, as opposed to just kind of swirling in that soup of emotional spentness.
Yeah. And you, Ben, from the beginning, you've always said, you need to have this clear, crisp vision. That's I go to bed at night sometimes hearing Ben say clear, crisp vision. But it's so key to this, because the natural reaction is, we get into that fight or flight mode, and we're kind of like, I don't want to do this anymore, right? I'm done with this. I'm either going to fight it or I'm going to walk away from it. That's kind of the inclination that we have when we're facing a crisis. But when you can have somebody who says, wait, hold on. And I've had coaches that have helped me through this, through various different business crises, right? Where that pesky 2008 recession, I had some people helping me through that, right? You need to see what that goal is. What's that objective that we're trying to reach, right? Mm-hmm. Okay, we'll navigate through this. We'll navigate through the muck, the oil spill of
literally
whatever's happening there, but really we need to get to the other shore. That's it's critical, and I think that being very clear and crisp about that, but also being empathetic at the same time, helps.
Yeah. One of the things that we've talked about a lot on our shows so far is this idea of psychological safety, and that being really critical from a foundational perspective, so that people can bring their best selves to work, so that people can feel free to share ideas or create or co-create or suggest ways of doing things that might be completely new or different, or react in some way that says, oh, that's an interesting idea. I totally disagree with it, but let's think through that with each other dialoguing. Do you think in a crisis there's room for that psychological safety? Or do you think that, for me, in my head, I feel like if it's not there already, it's really hard to create that in a crisis moment. But what you would love to see is the organization have that already there. And then you can take advantage of that in a crisis, because you say to your engineers, go figure out how to drill through miles of ocean and miles of seabed and I don't care what it costs. I don't care what it takes. Just figure it out. And people say, all right, we're going to rally around that. Or we have to get these miners out of a collapsed mine in Chile. We have no idea how we're going to do it, but you go figure it out. We trust you. We know you're smart. And if you don't have that from the get-go, I feel like crisis is not the time to try to instill that in people. If it's not there, I think then it's more like, okay, you've got your command and control approach and hope that that works. What's been your perspectives? What have you seen work?
It can be challenging enough in a peaceful situation, let's say a brainstorming session in a quiet conference room with coffee. I mean,
Right,
psychological safety is not even a given in that situation.
right, right.
So you add crisis to it, and
Yeah,
sometimes people really rise to the occasion. And even without that psychological safety as a foundation day to day, sometimes there are superheroes in a crisis and they make decisions that everyone stands behind and it works out. And there is no debate. There is no innovation necessary. There's no brainstorming in a crisis, unless there is these war room situations where all of the leaders go into a concentrated conversation and it is a laser focus on the solution.
Mhm.
But Ben, I think you're absolutely correct. If it is not already a part of the culture and there's already a sense of intimidation, fear, or harassment, and there is no safety, the crisis will
But
shatter. Crisis
yeah,
will shatter that
yeah.
organization.
And even if there's not that, even if there's not any of the negatives where you fear repercussion for voicing a new idea, or you fear even just saying something because you might get the stink eye from your boss, even if it's just a nice, relatively happy workplace, you still don't have that psychological safety, allowing people's ideas to flow in times of, and letting them rise to that occasion because they know that their opinions are trusted and valued, and may not go anywhere, but at least they're free to offer those things.
And I want to add one more thing to that
Yeah.
too. In a crisis, there is a accountability of those leaders also. It's as if they have to have not only the highest risk tolerance, but they also have the highest accountability. So as a leader, if a difficult decision has to be made, take the shot, right? That kind of decision sometimes can only be on the leader's shoulders
Mm-hmm.
or
That's why
see
they're the leaders.
and
Yeah.
part of the job.
Yeah. But I like that idea of heightened visibility of accountability.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's really cool.
Yeah. I mean, in a crisis, you will hear above my pay grade, out of here. Like that's if it's going to be said, that's where the colors will come out on that.
On the
And,
culture, yeah. And some people are very quick to say this is above my pay grade. I'm not even going to touch that. And other people say, you know what? I can't make this decision, but I'm going to offer up 3 ideas. And I think these are all really solid for X, Y, or Z reason. Yeah. Okay.
I want to
We've,
mention that at this point in time, I have yet to have mentioned an acronym once in this entire conversation. I'm very proud of myself on that.
I can't, I'm
Right?
speechless.
I haven't, not one acronym.
I know you've been training this discipline,
All right.
Rich.
I'm
I can't
fingers
promise
crossed,
that we're
Rich.
going to
We'll,
have that
we'll
the
give
rest
you
of
an
the time.
opportunity. I hope so. I hope
I
so.
don't have one yet,
Okay.
but
We'll get there.
we might be there sometime. I don't know.
Stay tuned, Harmonious
tuned.
Workplaces listeners, for whether or not Rich Cruz will come up with an acronym for this show. We also
Sweet.
promised you one tip that you can use to make sure that your crisis is not a complete crisis in and of itself, and how you manage it. And so we'll get to that in just a moment. In the meantime, did you come up with your acronym yet, Rich?
I have not. I have not.
Okay.
But what I will say is all of this discussion about communication and about crises and a big change, right, reminds me of there's a musical my family went to go see the other last year, I think it was, and we were just watching it the other day. It's called Come From Away. don't know if you've heard of this, but it's
I don't
about
know that one.
38 planes that got diverted to an airport in a small town in Newfoundland during 9/11.
Mm,
Sleepy little town doing their thing, all of a sudden have to host 38 planes when the skies had nothing in them, right? And here's this crisis situation, right, where you have authorities that are telling you this is what you need to do, right? And so that psychological safety totally not there, and you have a bunch of people, high emotions, of course, because of that situation. But even if it wasn't as intense as that, right? You still have people who don't know what's happening. Nobody's being able to communicate with them, right? But what ended up happening is you started to get people that were within the affected people, right? The passengers, right? Who were able to start working with the leadership to come up with solutions, right? So one passenger was, what about the pets that are on board? Like, is nobody paid? You can't leave the pets there without water and their medicine and food and all that stuff, right? Which totally went against policy, but you had to go and take care of these, so um, other ones you had just um people who spoke different languages, right? Like you needed to figure out
mm,
how can you allow them to communicate, and how can you communicate to them what's happening, right? So they started building little sections of various different languages that people spoke. I think all that goes down. You can actually take a lot of those lessons from this situation and apply them into almost any change where something goes wrong, right? Because I mean Murphy's law is going to prevail sometimes. But when you're allowed that, when you can actually take a step back and allow people to have the feedback and say and have a part in some of the decisions being made, what ends up happening at the end of the musical is you have a bunch of people who are sad that this basically
mm.
this project is over and they're disbanding, right? They're leaving people who they bonded with over the last however long the situation was, but it was not just a couple of days, right? So they've actually built a culture amongst them based on this crisis and based on all of the changes that they've made throughout this time. And now we're leaving, but everybody's I'm gonna say this, everybody's changed for good. Another musical, but um yeah, I just thought I'd bring that up because I think that was a very, very it kind of illustrates some of what we're
Mhm.
talking about. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a good example of where there may not have been any psychological safety, but people rose to the occasion. And in that case, I'm guessing that the leadership of the airport or the airlines were savvy enough to recognize that these folks were coming up with good ideas and necessary ideas, and not ideas that were so against policy that they would have caused major, major problems, right? I mean, you're talking about breaking a rule or two so that you could take care of a pet. Well, if that's going to make people feel like they have some control, some agency, they're doing something good, and it helps these pets, then of course, let's do that. It's not like you're saying we need to get this plane back in the air now. It's totally different. And so the people in charge, quote unquote, would be able to say, okay, this is a low risk change that we can make that will help keep the situation not just stable, but maybe make things better. People can be with their pets. People can figure out how to communicate with each other in language zones, things like that. It helps the leadership get the messaging through. It helps people feel like they're contributing to some kind of a solution and not just waiting and sitting and waiting with no idea and no sense of how to control things. And so that's another thing. I think we've talked about that a little bit before, about how we want people to feel like they have agency in terms of co-creating a
Right.
change. But
Right.
maybe that's a sort of a way that's come through with this kind of crisis situation.
At the risk of coming dangerously close to an acronym theory, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, I think that it's so classic and it's so timeless, and so many people understand it because in a crisis, those airplanes, that town, what was the first priority? You know, the lives of the people and the pets. You know, it's sort of the entire pyramid all at once.
Sure,
Right?
sure. They needed to feel yeah, they needed to make sure that they were secure and they had their food and all of that stuff, which none of it was there, right? And they had to work together to make sure everybody had all of those needs satisfied, to the point of where there was some level of self-actualization at that top there, where some people really came into their own, during the situation.
Contrast it with the other horrifying classic kind of story that everybody knows about the airplane that crashes in the mountains, and other
Oh,
terrible
yes,
decisions ensue.
right. Yes, yes. That's a totally different change. Yeah.
These examples, the one that we were just talking about, Rich, where this idea of your musical was coming from, it makes me think that there must be some kind of playbook or rubric or framework or some kind of approach that airlines have, that airports have, when there is some kind of known thing that's probably going to happen. When you run an airline, you're probably going to have some kind of engine issue and you need ground crew to come fix that before the flight can take off. You're probably going to have some kind of issue where flights need to be grounded because of weather. So how do you manage that? So there's probably something in place. But I think that leads us into the one thing that at least we've talked a little bit about. You need to have something like that in place. And so this is the one thing that people can do as a sort of preparation for crisis, when you're not in crisis, ideally, is start to think through, what is it that you can imagine happening based on your business world. If, for example, you're an airline, you know you're going to have groundings. You can't control the weather. It's going to happen. So how do you
Right.
prepare for that? You're going to have mechanical issues. Those just happen when you have very complex machines. How are you going to handle that? What you probably couldn't have ever imagined is a situation like 9/11. How are you, how then do you start to think about, based on the planning that you've done for known crises or situations, how do you extrapolate that for something that could never have occurred to you, or
Sure.
hopefully would be like the rarest of the rare type of events? How do you start to plan for that?
Yep. Yeah. Well, and that's just it. That's what they were employing, these policies and procedures for groundings. Like, so people were just on the plane for 20 something hours before they decided, well, we probably need to get them out of here because this is going to be a longer term situation, right? And so then it went into some more um long term plans that were made more by the municipality, right?
Mm-hmm.
When there are
Mm-hmm.
um emergencies, like natural disasters and that type of thing,
Right.
right? So
Right.
that type of stuff prevails, and we see those types of plans from like FEMA, in the
Mm-hmm.
United States. This
Mm-hmm.
was of course in Canada, but
Right.
where they have these longer term. When I was at the Coin Laundry Association, we had people that were affected in Texas and Florida by hurricanes, right? And so
Hmm.
they have they have to quickly adapt to that. And it's sort of weird that, like, the businesses there, they've got this down pat. Like, it's just, it's a project for them. Oh, we got to board everything up, get everybody out of here. We'll be back in a little while. We put everything
Mm-hmm.
back together again.
But isn't
You
that
know,
amazing that
it's amazing.
it's kind of become that? Um, and that with a little bit of planning and probably having gone through it once or twice, you kind of get into the sense of, oh, it's not it's a it's an issue that we have to deal with, but it's not a complete crisis where we have no idea how to handle this
Right.
and we don't know anything about what's going on. And sure, it's not great, but at least we know, okay, board the windows, unplug the machines, whatever you do, make sure that your sump pump is working. I don't know, but those
Yeah.
kinds of things you sort
Sure.
of get yourself prepared for.
Yep.
So it
A
seems
little
like
bit of
those
preparation.
are all really, really important things to do. And it helps you figure out, who do you communicate with? Is it the municipalities? Who's the mayor? Keep all those lists up to date. Make sure that if you're reaching out to FEMA, the FEMA 1-800 call FEMA number or whatever that might be. And so you have all this listed there so that in a crisis, you're not going to your, people probably don't use yellow pages anymore, but you're not going to the yellow pages and trying to figure out where do you start, right? So it's having that playbook in place, or at least some kind of an outline in place. And then that helps you kind of focus on the things that you need to be communicating with people, rather than focusing on the, oh crud, where is that number? I got to call somebody in FEMA. You're able to just offload that from your brain, and you can think about, okay, is it the right thing to do to allow people to go feed their pets and comfort their pets? I think so. Yeah, it's a no-brainer. Let's just do that, right? And who do we need to talk to for vendors about food or toileting our passengers and things like that, right? All of those things, you get brain space for that.
Right.
So, go ahead, Rich.
Oh no, go ahead, Sean. Yeah.
What I hear you saying, Ben and Rich both, to answer that question, what can you do before a crisis hits? You can plan, and you can do as much training and drilling and sharing of information, building of relationships in your community with each other that are there to rely on when something unexpected happens. And those are things you can control ahead of time, but you have to make time for it. You have to make a priority of it. I have just a quick example as you were talking, Ben. It occurred to me when we had the earthquake recently.
Right.
I wasn't thinking about standing in the doorway. It took me the entire length of the event to figure out what was happening. How many times have you heard what to do when there's an earthquake? That all went right out the window. It wasn't as if I was remembering those things. So,
but can you imagine if you lived in California, or if you grew up in California, where earthquakes are just almost part of the culture there, part of the lifestyle? And so people there, they just go about their normal activities, and they say, oh yeah, that was an earthquake. And if you're visiting from out of town, you're sort of wondering if this is that moment in your life. And they're just like, yeah, it's an earthquake, no big deal. And so it's they're used to it. They've gone through it a number of times, and they probably are drilled from a very young age, get into that doorway or whatever. And it's just something that they're used to. But I love that idea. I think that's, if we're wrapping up a show, I think that would probably be the perfect place to leave it, Cheryl, is just plan ahead. Like you said, you can plan and be thoughtful about your planning.
Yep. Absolutely.
Can't plan for everything, but you can plan the things that you know.
Right. And you can at least have some framework, so that when something happens that you have no idea that you could have planned for, right? I mean, who would have expected COVID-19? But at least you have something in place to say, if for some reason our employees are unable to come to work, let's say because of an earthquake, well, we can extrapolate from that to COVID-19. It's not perfect. It's not great. It's not ideal, but at least it's a starting place to say, well, employees can't come to work. How do we make sure that they're safe? How do we make sure that they're able to do some level of work if that's important for us?
Sure.
Those kinds
of things.
Like you say, it's that grounding.
Yeah. Going back to your airline example, just briefly, when you see that series Airline Disasters, which we've watched almost all of them with our son, that pilot has a book, and it's this thick, and like it's got tabs, and he knows where to go, and it's exact, everything that they could plan for, the exact instructions. If everyone had their own version of that emergency pilot book, right? It would be great.
I leave you all with the Harmonious Workplaces crisis management app, where it's an AI enabled thing that you would be able to just speak into your device and say, we're having a crisis about X, Y, or Z. And it gives you the playbook right there. The Harmonious Workplaces crisis management app. It's your idea of the month right there.
I love that. I love that.
Not just for pilots.
Not for pilots anymore.
Well, We got some work ahead of us.
There you go.
Before we wrap this up, one thing I think to add into the plan, which again kind of taking this off of the what they did in this play, but what you see in some of the other other situations is to celebrate the successes, because so one of the things that they did in the play here is that they ended up having musicians and stuff performing, and they got together, people were drinking, and they were passing out the little bottles of booze to people. Don't do that in your change management stuff maybe every time, but to have some kind of a celebration of, we made it, we got through this. You can kind of plan for some of that too, like how are we gonna do that, and really make people like raise the positive affect of people about what we've done. That really helps to solidify the culture, and brings people together in a really much more meaningful way. So
It's a great idea. Acknowledge the successes, acknowledge the skills come into play in crisis, and the rewards for that. Yeah, it's great.
Plan to celebrate. Cool. All right. Well, I think we've come to the end of this episode. Thank you all very much for tuning in. I hope that you've gotten some really great actionable things to do in a crisis situation in your change initiatives. Be sure to follow us at harmoniousworkplaces.com and on your favorite streaming platform. And be sure to like and share us on social media. Any last words, Ben or Cheryl?
It's been great. I really
let us know what we've missed.
Yeah, please.
Let us know any tips or experiences that you've had. Right
on. Okay. See y'all real soon. Thanks a lot.
Thanks.
Take care.
Thanks. See you guys.
Thanks for listening to Harmonious Workplaces. You can find Harmonious Workplaces on LinkedIn, Twitter, YouTube, Spotify, Amazon, Apple, and other streaming platforms. We'd love any feedback on whatever channel you find us on. Please rate, like, and share our podcast with your network, and remember to add Harmonious Workplaces to your list of favorites to get notified about each new episode. To contact Rich or Cheryl, please visit www.workbalanceconsulting.com. To connect with Ben, find him on LinkedIn or visit at www.harborsidestrategy.com.